In 1991, I was serving in the army and I was following a spiritual discipline. And I went to a library in Paris to get a book, and it was costing 120 francs, and I was having only 50 francs. And I could not buy the books I wanted to get. So, just close by the book I was looking for, there was a small booklet called Health and Integral Yoga by the Mother. And I bought it because it was costing the same price as the money I was having in my pocket. And I went back to the army and I read the book, and I was so amazed about what I discovered reading that book. So I phoned to a friend who was quite knowing a lot of things about spirituality, asking him about Mother and Sri Aurobindo, and he told me, "Oh, you are a doctor. You should read Satprem's book called The Mind of the Cells, because it will be very interesting for you as a doctor. And Mother and Sri Aurobindo are, for me, the greatest masters." So I bought that book of Satprem, and I went back to the army and I read fully. And it was for me a complete adventure, because it opened to me the realm of dreams, and all the dreams became of a different nature with the spiritual experiences. While serving in the army, I was treating the family of the soldiers, so that means I was having very few patients, 1 or 2 or 3 per day, and I was having a lot of time, and I decided to buy every month a volume of Mother's Agenda with the salary I was getting from the army. This is how the Aurovillian adventure began for me in the east of France. It was the way I discovered Mother's Agenda, and it was for me really an extraordinary book, and I got to know Satprem through the conversations he was having with the Mother.
Alors le corps de mère a commencé à avoir des expériences tout à fait fantastiques, n'est-ce pas, qu'elle ne disait qu'à moi, parce qu'elle savait bien que je la prenais pas pour une folle. Elle se comprenait, n'est-ce pas. Elle pouvait me parler, alors qu'elle ne pouvait rien dire aux autres. Elle pouvait, parce qu'elle savait que pour moi, ayant vécu l'asphyxie que j'ai connue, tout était possible, ou je voulais que tout fût possible. Alors, dans ce fond de la conscience cellulaire pure, n'est-ce pas, dégagée de ses revêtements, on commence à découvrir des choses tout à fait fantastiques.
I slowly got the idea of going to India, and the most funny thing is that I had said many times before that there was only one country in which I will never go, and this country was India. Reading the agendas, I discovered the existence of Auroville, and then it was a call. I had to go to Auroville, and I came to India mainly to go to Auroville, because I knew already some Aurovillians and that I have met in Paris, and I wanted to come to see with my own eyes what Auroville was. So my first trip to India was in '92, and I came 3 months to India, and I spent 1 full month in Auroville. So after returning to France, I earned money for almost a year, and then I decided to come back to live at least for a year, to try for a year period to live in Auroville. And I arrived exactly on 1993 on December 5th. There has just been a cyclone, and the road between Chennai airport and Auroville was completely broken, with a lot of fallen trees, and it was such an experience. I have spent 10 years in Auroville, and actually these 10 years have been absolutely amazing and wonderful for me. The Mother is really present in Auroville, and but while living in Auroville, I always had the idea of meeting Satprem, because I was always having the wish of meeting him. I discovered Satprem had written a lot of letters to Aurovillians, and I decided slowly to collect all these letters, and I was wishing to put them all together in form of a book, and as I was too busy to do it, I gave it to another Aurovillian who did it. Satprem was really concerned by Auroville and by Aurovillians, and I think he tried at his best to guide Aurovillians to build a truthful Auroville, to build something differently with all the willing of truth behind all what is done in Auroville. I think he was really having a precise inner vision of Auroville and of the challenge that Auroville is. Mother had already said many things about Auroville. She had written somewhere that Auroville wants to be the cradle of the supermanhood. And for me it was something quite important, because I thought it was really the place where collectively we could try to build a bridge with this supermind consciousness. And it was the place where collectively we could aspire to this power to descend in order to transform at the same time the functioning of the Aurovillian society, but also the internal functioning of every being. The experience which is described in Mother's Agenda, as well as the experience described in Evolution 2 or in Notebooks of an Apocalypse by Satprem, is an evolutionary process which takes place in the body at the level of the cells, at the level of the cell consciousness. Auroville for me has all these dimensions, and all these dimensions can interact at the same time. Auroville is made of individuals who came for the experiment, who are called to make the experiment, and at the same time it is a collective body with a collective aspiration. And even if everyone has the capacity and the freedom of seeing the things, each one in his own way, it is a collective body, and this collective body is expressed by a common vibration among all Aurovillians. When I lived in Auroville, quite often I was having the attempt or the call to meet Satprem and to meet him and to share silence with him, or even though to ask him some questions. And as a doctor, I felt quite concerned and interested by this cellular transformation, and I think it's a very fascinating adventure, and especially because it has never been done before, and also because it's an adventure that gives a lot of hope and a meaning also to the absurdity of the world we are living in the West. Since I was a child, I was always having a question about evolution, and I could not understand how the evolution has taken so many millions of years to reach the human being, supposedly the summit of the evolution, who could live only a few years and was watching TV and football matches and drinking beer on weekends. It was for me very strange. For me, the discovering of the teachings of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, and also the discovery of the writings of Satprem, because what I really loved in Satprem is the intensity of being he is getting, and even though some persons could find him a kind of in him a kind of fanaticism, I don't think it's at all a kind of fanaticism. I think it's uniquely an intensity of being, which is so intense with such an aspiration that it's the only way to make something else happen. When you have to get to the point of self-surrender, where there is only that aspiration which exists, there is only that call, that prayer. And that possibility, that call, that prayer, that is the thing that makes the thing happen. I discovered then the hymns of the Rig Veda, and especially Sri Aurobindo had translated the hymns to Agni, but I was more attracted by the hymns to Soma from the 9th book of the Rig Veda. And sometime afterwards I discovered the hymn to Aton of Akhenaton. It was the same force, and I was having the same experience. And for me it was clear that there was a clear link between the hymns of the Rig Veda, of the hymns of Aton, and the writings of Mother and Sri Aurobindo and the experiment of Mother and Sri Aurobindo. While in Auroville in 1997, I made a very powerful dream. I was walking on a path, and close to me there was a silent old lady unknown to me. And we were walking. At one point, we reached a crossroads, and there was a pole with two arrows, one on the right side, one on the left side. And then the lady told me, well, now you got to make a choice. If you choose to go on the right side, you will follow the path of the ordinary life, and you will have all the money, all the richness, all the luxurious life you want to have, if you want to have such, and you will never lack of anything. If you decide to choose to go on the left side, it is the spiritual way, and you will go till the end of this way. So now you have to choose. So I chose immediately to go on the left, and I began walking and running on the path going to the left side. But the problem is that the beginning of the path was very muddy and very slippery, so I could not go very fast. But at one point I felt there was a very strong hand pushing me from the back and helping me to get safe and to go through all these slippery areas. And I felt myself at the bottom of a cliff. And going upwards to the cliff, there was a very specific path with a stone staircase. And I was running upwards, and I was really feeling very, very happy. The more I was getting upwards, the more I was feeling happy, because it was for me the experience of having been there before many, many, many times. And when I reached on the top of the cliff, there was a small house, and I entered that house, and there was a corridor, and on the right side there were some windows with a small square glasses. And at one point when I was on that house, I understood that I was going to pass an exam. So I entered one of these rooms, and I felt at one point that it was my turn to pass the exam. And I noticed there was a small puja on the corner of the room with a candle, with an incense stick burning, and with a Ganapati image. So I uncovered myself, I took off all my clothes, and I was naked, and I bowed at the feet of Ganapati. And a man came to me telling me he was the chief of the exams. He told me, you have given everything to the divine, which is fine, but you have forgotten to remove your socks, and the socks are the feelings. So I woke up from that dream by this sentence. And then the idea came to me to go to Varanasi to bath in the Ganga with socks, and then remove the socks in the river and let them go with the stream. And I did that, and I came back to Auroville, and I really felt relieved of something very deeply. I made that dream in 1997, and I left Auroville in 2002. I went back to Paris and in order to settle a medical consultation, and then everything was going very fine. I was getting money, I was having a lot of patients, but somehow I was really still remembering the dream I made in 97, and I was wondering what was wrong, because in my dream I chose to go on the left side, and in my actual life I was feeling I have been more on the right side of the path. So I was one night going to sleep, having inwardly this intense question, would I have made a mistake? On the same night, I made a powerful dream. I was on my room, and I could not walk because I was wounded, and I was with my little child who was falling asleep. And I looked back, and I saw inside the room a huge Indian elephant, and I was quite puzzled, wondering what he was doing there. And he was getting closer to me, and then he came upon myself with all his weight, and I was not afraid at all. I was in an attitude of absolute surrender, and with no fear, because I have seen them in India doing the same with their mahout. And at one point he took me on his trunk, and I could feel his breathing, and then he rocked me on his trunk, and I was falling asleep on his trunk. And when I woke up in the dream, he was living in the room, and my child was waking up, and most probably my child was my inner being, and then I could walk again anew. The next morning, while at home, I got a phone call asking me as a doctor, which was quite surprising because no patient was having my private number. And she told me, I am Yolande Lemoine, I am a friend of Satprem. Could you come, would you like to come and give some medical treatment to Satprem? I said, of course. I was so happy to get that call. It was so incredible for me. And I asked her, when are you leaving? And she told me, I'm leaving after tomorrow. So I said, I'm sorry, I cannot make it because, I have many patients and I have to reschedule all my patients before I am able to go with you. And I was knowing Yolande because when I was in Auroville looking for Satprem's letters, there were so many beautiful letters from Satprem to Yolande that I read that then I knew who she was. So it is in such a way that the adventure that brought me close to Satprem happened. I had to cancel many appointments and I managed to get 10 full days to be free and in order to go and try to help Satprem, medically speaking. And so then the problem came because I needed to book a plane ticket, and I looked and there was no seat left. I phoned to a friend of a friend who was having a travel agency in Paris, and she told me she was going to look because Air France had just opened a straight flight between Paris and Bangalore. So she called me a few minutes later telling me that there was only one seat left on that trip. So I asked her, of course, to book it. When I was intending to go and pick up the ticket in the agency, it was quite far from my consultation, and I was so booked that I could not make any space in order to go and pick up the ticket. So she could understand my problem on the phone, and then she asked me, but where are you working? Where is your office? So I gave her the address where I was working, and she told me after a silence, well, tomorrow I'm going to meet my gynecologist. He's on the street which is just nearby your street, so I can come and I can bring you your plane ticket. So actually I tell all these details because I think it's quite interesting to notice the material and the physical precision when something is really due to happen. And that is how my trip leading me to close to Satprem in Kotagiri began. When I arrived in Kotagiri, I found a place so amazingly beautiful. There was such a peace, an intense peace I have never seen anywhere else in that place. And I met Sujata, who was Satprem's wife, and she advised me to rest because I was quite tired from the long journey I made. So I met Yolande and we became friends because I have shared with her my life experience, and she told me, but one day you should write about your own life because you should try to find a thread linking all the events of your life. And she also told me, she invited me to come to meet her in Paris when we were back in Paris, because she told me she was having correspondence with Satprem. Satprem has been writing to her for more than 40 years, and she wanted me to see the letters because she wanted to get rid of them. So she told me, please, when you come back in Paris, please come to meet me and I'll let you read Satprem's letters. So I went to rest, and I was struck because there was such a silence and such a force pouring down on that place, and it was a continuous white Niagara force, and among the silence of the countryside, of the hill, and I could hear the songs of the birds and the jumping of the monkeys, and I think I slept 2 hours and I was fully awake, and after that. What was very strong for me on that place was the presence of the mother. I could really feel constantly mother's presence, and especially I could even feel the scent, the smell of the perfumes in mother's room was really present there in Satprem's place, and it was so alive. On the next morning, Sujata told me it was the time for me to meet Satprem. So I was waiting outside, sitting on a lawn, and I could feel like a small being coming upon my head and coming, and he has sat down on top of my head, and it was so pleasant, so delicious to feel that being sitting there, and it remained present with me all along my journey in Satprem's place and even afterwards when I went back.
Et c'était vraiment quelque chose de très agréable, très agréable, et qui est resté là tout le temps et qui m'a même accompagné après mon retour de Kotagiri pendant longtemps. Et voilà. Alors,
I went to meet Satprem, and he was coming out of his room. He was helped by a lady who was helping him to walk, and he came down the 2 steps of his door, and then I met Satprem's gaze. And it was such an incredible moment, because his gaze was so blue, like I'd met sometimes on dreams before, and I could feel that he was so fragile, so vulnerable, and at the same time I felt a tremendous force pouring down through him, and I will never forget the gaze I met that day, because I have never felt I was seen in such a way. I could feel his gaze was really looking deeply inward, deeply, like at the bottom of each cell was being looked upon by this gaze. And at the same time, he was having this fragility, this vulnerability. There was such a strength, such a power pouring down, and it was so sweet at the same time, so enveloping. It was such an experience I will never be able to forget. I cannot say the duration of the moment I met Satprem's gaze, because for me it was like an eternity, and maybe it was only a few minutes, but it was a very, very long time for me. And after that moment I smiled, and he looked to Sujata and he told her, have you noticed he's smiling? And he was so surprised I was smiling. And the first thing Satprem asked to me after that meeting was, do you think I'm mad? When he asked me that question, Satprem was crying, and it was so surprising for me. And I answered him, no, you are not mad. I think it's the word is completely mad, but not you. And he told me, I don't understand the evolution. For me, the evolution should have stopped with the birds, because I don't understand this human species. And he said that this word was very strange for him. And he asked me, what are you looking for? I answered, I was looking for beauty and for truth. And he told me, well, beauty I can understand, because the nature, the trees, all are very beautiful. But the truth, usually it's a quarrel between schools. I said, no, I'm not interested in that kind of truth. I'm interested in the truth we live and we become. He looked again to Sujata, and he told her again that I was smiling. And he seemed so surprised. He looked again to Sujata, and he told her again that I was smiling. And he seemed so surprised that I was smiling. And then he told to Sujata and the person who was there also that I was looking very nice, and that for him to tell me that I was nice was something, meaning that I was open and I was believing in the new force and the new world happening and going to come. He was feeling that there was a tremendous force pouring down from the top of the head till the feet, and even under the feet, and then coming up again till the head, and then coming down again continuously. Satprem writes, it comes in through the top of the head and hurtles down to hit against an irreducible obstacle, coagulated like basalt, always the same, beneath the feet. The lightning falls there, rebounds against the obstacle, rises to fall again and again and again, with each breath. The body is the pipeline, the site where the percussion takes place. There is, underneath, a basaltic or mineral layer, which seems to be as refractory and as vast as the earth. Satprem was not going out of his room very often, because he was feeling difficult to walk with this tempest of lead pouring down constantly. And he was walking a little bit, helped by Yolande and by Sujata, and then I helped him also to walk. And what I was surprised was of the accuracy, the precision of his sight, this eyesight when we were walking, because we were walking and then he said to me, please stop, don't put your feet. And he bowed down, and he picked up a small flower, very tiny flower, and he gave it to me, and I was so amazed because I couldn't myself even see the flower he gave to me. He picked up several flowers for me, and he gave them to me, and then we continued to walk. And I came to meet Satprem because I was supposed to treat him as a doctor and as an acupuncture doctor. Especially, I'm specialized in auricular acupuncture, on ear acupuncture. I have been called to treat him because he was suffering from neck pain, very intense, and he speaks a lot about his pains in the notebooks of an apocalypse. Ear acupuncture is working because when we put needles on the ear, we can block the nervous impulses going through the brain, which are giving the information of pain, especially through the action of an organ called the thalamus in the brain. And the funny coincidence is that when I was traveling on the plane, I was reading the last volume which has been released of the Notebooks of an Apocalypse. In that volume, he speaks about the thalamus because there was a scientific article who was been displayed on the book, and he told him, he was writing that for him that was really something which was not true because it was a science of liars. So when I met him and I had to make the first treatment to him, it was funny because for me I was really feeling uncomfortable because for me I was feeling like I was like a liar, and he was for me incarnating truth consciousness in his body. And Satprem was really oversensitive, especially at the times of the treatments, because when I was willing to put him some needles on the ear, he was feeling really intense pain even before I could needle him. And so I could really feel that his sensitivity was really overreactive, and not only regarding the treatment, but also regarding all his sensitivity was overreactive. I will give you an example. While I was with him, I have been told not to speak to Satprem about Auroville, and because it was a difficult issue for him, and so I have respected that. But when I was with him, and especially one day I went down to the village to give a phone call to some Aurovillian friends, and when I came up, I met him again, and he told me, I don't understand why, but I can feel Auroville consciousness with me. After the first treatment, I felt the need to walk. So I walked and I went down to the village, and I was walking, and then suddenly I found myself at the bottom of a cliff. And then it was such a surprise for me because it was exactly the cliff I have dreamed on 1997 with the specific stone steps which were there actually. And I felt so amazed that I couldn't believe what was really happening, and I had to sit. I sat down on a stone, I pinched myself, and I could see it was really the reality. At that moment, I realized that the house that was in the dream of 1997 was exactly Satprem's house. It was the same description, the small corridor with windows with small glasses on the right side, with rooms on the left. It was exactly the same place. And so I understood that on that dream, I had been given all the details of what was going to happen afterwards for this meeting. While in Satprem's place, the nights were really difficult for me because I could hardly sleep, especially because I felt there was a cleaning of my own subconscious, and some dreams I made very often during my childhood came back again as a surprise for me. For example, one of the dreams is that I was going under the earth, and there were prisons. And with corridors, and on each side of the corridor there were like cells, and with prisoners, but there were no prisoners. They were actually skeletons, dead corpses. And at the time I was walking on these corridors, it was the time when the dead skeletons were waking up and were coming, willing to come out. And so in my dreams I could hear the padlocks cracking. So I made the same dream several times in Satprem's plays, and it was so vivid that it was so difficult even for me to go to bed, because I knew I was going to meet this dream again. I made also another dream several times while living in Auroville. I was feeling that a pressure upon my head was pushing me under the earth, and I was then walking down through a circular staircase. There was nothing to see, nothing was seen, but the more I was going down, the more it was really difficult and suffocating for me. And I knew that place was the place where all the pain and all the suffering of the world was there. And I had to go several times to this place, and it was so painful, so terrible to go there, so suffocating. And then I was suffocating, and then I was waking up, and I made again the same dream that I had forgotten also in Satprem's place. And the nights were also difficult because Sujata called me very often because she couldn't take care of him during the full night and the full day, so she had to rest. So I spent many hours with him during the night. He was not sleeping so much. And then Satprem asked me, please, could you play The Emperor, which is the fifth piano concerto by Beethoven. He was really fond of that music. And you can imagine both of us alone on that huge house, on that place, and playing Beethoven's concerto at full volume. And at some of the times he liked to hear devotional songs by Tagore, and at some times he was asking me to lit him a small cigar. He liked to smoke some small cigars sometimes. I have been really blessed to share intense moments with Satprem, because quite often, he told me that he was not speaking much, that he was not writing anymore, and that he was remaining silent. So we were sharing silent moments very often, and especially he was sitting on his armchair, I was sitting down on the floor, and he was taking my hand and looking me on my gaze. And we stood silently for quite a long time, like if he was taking me somewhere and making a trip, a journey. And when we were coming back, he told me, have you felt that power? Have you felt that strength, that tempest of lead? What was the dense solar element in which Satprem had entered? One day, Satprem chanced on the most precise possible definition, dropped by Sri Aurobindo in the course of a conversation, as though inadvertently. Sri Aurobindo had called it supermind, and he had said simply, "The supermind is harder than diamond, yet more fluid than gas." Satprem's body was being pounded by a supermind, which had been brought down by Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, and which he had been able to contact as soon as he had crossed the borders of the mind and the overmind. The body of Satprem, which was under the new impelling force, needed repeated experiences thousands of times, and these experiences had to do with the old resistant evolutionary framework and with the process of breathing. What I can really say, because I have seen it, is that Satprem was not sick at all, neither physically, neither mentally, but he was undergoing an evolutionary process was taking him completely and continuously. When we read the notebooks of an apocalypse, we can have the feeling that he is able somehow to stop the process, in the sense that he says, well, I have had this experience and now I'm going to walk, and if it's like the process is stopping. But when I met him, actually he was constantly in the experience, and It was so intense that I could feel he was like in a kind of convulsion, which was leading him towards a new state of being, physically, in his body and at the level of his cells. And what is quite important also to say, and Satprem insisted in that, is that the condition in which he was for him the translation or the transcription of something which was happening for the world, for the earth, as a collective evolutionary process. Also, Satprem said something very important, is that it was a dangerous experiment because the new force attracting to her what was absolutely opposed to her. So it creates kind of critical situations in a physical condition, for example in Satprem's body or in a mother experience, or also at the level of the earth. And if we look, for example, in Mother's agenda, we can feel that very often she's on the verge of passing away, and she's not passing away, and the experience continues. In the world, when we look at the world situation presently, we can say that the situation is very critical everywhere, and we are always at the breaking point of a war or of a conflict. In Satprem's book, The Tragedy of the Earth, there is a very beautiful sentence. He says that this, speaking of this new power, this new force, is waiting for the surviving ones. What he meant writing that was that this new power, this new force is not willing to make the destruction, to destroy anything, but that this force is waiting for the individuals, the beings who are able to make the link towards the new consciousness. This is one of the reasons Mother and Sri Aurobindo, when they create their ashram, have settled the physical education as a clue to physical preparation in order to increase the body receptivity, in order to help the body to receive and to contain the new force which is descending. I have noticed that when I was living in Auroville for myself, but also because I have shared that with many friends and many brothers Aurovillians. What I have lived while being with Satprem gave me the energy to write the epilogue of the letters to Yolande, which are published. The hearing of the reading of this epilogue to Viviane José Restiaux, who is a friend of mine I love, and who is painter, made possible for her to create at once several paintings, very beautiful. And that's a proof that somehow Satprem's energy and is still really active and present.
À ce moment-là, j'ai eu deux gestes que je n'ai jamais eus. C'est pris mes pigments, j'ai écrasé mes pigments, pouf, avec une puissance inouïe, d'une couleur et d'une autre couleur, et toute l'œuvre s'est déployée dans ce sens. Qu'est-ce que nous réserve de prendre en charge le corps du monde?
I would like to say what I have seen. A totally transparent being, crossed by all what was reaching him, of an extreme sensibility, giving him an aspect of brittleness, and at the same time bathed permanently in a formidable stream of force, flowing relentlessly like torrents in his body. A storm of lead, as he used to say. I have seen in his blue gaze this power of fire and love at the same time. I have seen this being undergoing continuously the assault of this colossal force, as in an agony or in a convulsion, proportional to the intensity of its power, fighting its way in the body of the earth. I helped him at my best, but I can say I have felt totally helpless in front of such an extraordinary process, and other than the ordinary human physiology. I knew the experience of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. I knew the evolution was moving, but I have seen it. I know it is happening. and I just wanted to testify.
C'est vraiment l'être total qui s'expanse, qui va s'expanser dans la lumière, pratiquement en conscience. Il est dans l'infinitude de tout nous devenir. Car il est à la fois dans une direction comme volontaire et en même temps, non. C'est dirigé vers une destinée plus grande que nous-mêmes.
At one moment when I was with Satprem, I was seeing him suffering from this tempest of lead, and I told him I would love to be able to take a little bit of that force upon myself in order to relieve you. And he looked at me and he told me, but you know, my little one, you are here for that purpose. And that was so surprising for me. And what I can say is that Satprem was really liking to be with other persons. He liked the company of other persons because he was living alone with Sujata, his wife, and the person taking care of him. But when Yolande was here, he was so happy, and I could see, I mean, they were joking together, and there was such a comfortable atmosphere for him, and he was really pleased, and I could really feel that he was also happy for me to be there with him. For me, Satprem actually was really living very simply with very few needs and with almost nothing. He was very simple, and he was really incarnating the simplicity he was talking about. I will tell now another dream which is quite important because he says something about something that was going to happen. Actually, on the dream, I was with Satprem, and on the first part of the dream, Satprem was teaching to me how to sail. And what was really beautiful for me also is that Sri Aurobindo was present, which was quite uncommon for me because I dreamt very scarcely about Sri Aurobindo. And in the second part of the dream, I have been told that Satprem has died, and I was in such a revolt telling that it was not possible that Satprem died. And all the scene was displayed and was shown in the following way. Actually, there was a small boat which is representing Satprem, which was completely upside down in the sea and completely wrecked. And suddenly there is a huge boat, like a super tanker, a petrol boat, coming and picking up the small boat and putting him on board. And I was watching the scene and seeing that the small boat was having absolutely no scratch, nothing was happening to him. He was absolutely intact and in a perfect condition. And the big boat was representing a mother. The following day of that dream, Sujata was going to the dentist, a half-a-day journey. So we stood alone, Satprem, and the lady was taking care of him and myself. And he wanted to walk. So we went outside and we were walking a little bit more than the day before because he was willing to. And at some point he was not feeling well, so he asked me to come back to the house. So we were coming back. We sat on the stairs of his door, and then I helped him to come inside the house, and then he fainted. He lost completely consciousness and he fell down on the floor. So I took him on my arms and I brought him on his bed, and I was so scared that I immediately went to take my blood pressure apparatus and some acupuncture needles, and I checked his blood pressure, and then I was willing to put him a needle in order to bring him out of this condition. And I told him I was speaking to him at the same time, and I told him I was going to needle him, and he only said, "Don't needle." And he removed my hand and he began repeating a mother's mantra, which is Ma, Ma, Ma continuously. I was quite, anyway, worried about his condition. And when Sujata came, at once he woke up and he stood up and he took her on his arms and asked her, "I hope everything has been going fine in the dentist. I hope you haven't suffered too much." And that was all. I had forgotten to say something important, is that in the dream I made before Sujata went to the dentist, in which Satprem was dying, it was also said that after Satprem passing away, Sujata was also passing away. And that's quite important because actually, when in the reality, when Satprem passed away, 2007, a few months afterwards, Sujata passed also away. So it's like in the dream there was also a transcription of something which was really going to happen. What I can say also about Satprem's gaze and what I spoke about before about his extreme vulnerability and fragility, and at the same time the so powerful force pouring down, reminds me about a sentence of Sri Aurobindo where he was speaking about the supermind, and he was telling that he was as fluid as a gas and harder than the diamond, which actually are physically both the opposites, and who are gathered, and which is for me one of the characteristics of the supermind. I spoke with Satprem and telling him about the dream I made with the elephant, because the person taking care of him told me that he dreamt also about the elephant, having once an elephant upon himself in his room. So when I spoke to Satprem about this dream, he was so surprised that I have made the same dream, and he told me that the elephant for me was at the same time the symbol of the strength and of the wisdom, and he told me that both of them are needed and requested for the supermind condition, and that he told me that for him, when I told him that the elephant has rocked me on his trunk, he told me that for him that was a clear sign that it was the new force who has been rocking me. Regarding the sensitivity of Satprem, the first session I used acupuncture needles, but I realized that I could not do it anymore because he was so oversensitive. So luckily I have brought with me a soft laser, which is a device which is displaying a beam of infrared coherent light, and you can apply this light on specific hair points, and you can also control what you do taking the pulse. And I treat him several times with the laser, and he was relieved actually from his pains only with the action of the infrared beams. Satprem actually was relieved from his pains, and he could walk much better outside and much longer, and especially after the sessions of laser treatment. Satprem has shared with me many sensations, many experiences he was undergoing in his process, and he told me also something important, is that his body was the way, especially for the word. So when I put all these things together, and I realized while being there that, and he insisted upon that also, that what he was living was a transcription of something which was happening for the earth and happening in the earth at the same time. So I realized that with Satprem I was not in front of an ordinary being, but that I knew already before, but that it was impossible to treat him as in a conventional way, because he was escaping from some physiological laws, and he was on a new physical consciousness condition. The 10 days and 10 nights I spent with Satprem were one of the most intense periods of my life, because I have never lived such an intensity of being and of silence and of tremendous force at the same time. And when I went back to Europe and to Paris, actually the returning was quite difficult, because as Satprem said, this force is attracting to her absolutely what is opposed to her, and I have been going through that process while returning. Especially I was in contact with Satprem's force through the letters he wrote to Yolande, because I was typing the letters at the time for the preparation of the book. And I could only tell that the few months following my return from Kotagiri were quite difficult for me, because all my inner difficulties were rising up, and I had to face all together. After returning from Satprem, Yolande made me meet Doudou Diène, who is well known from Aurovilians, and through Doudou Diène I met a lady working in the UNESCO and who is part of the parliament in India, and through her I have met many Indian doctors and Indian scholars, and which was I was really aiming for before while I was living in Auroville. And I met through these doctors. I had the opportunity to return to India, but professionally I was then teaching and giving classes of hair acupuncture in Delhi, in Sarnath, in Kerala. I can only say that all this happened after my visit to Satprem. For me, Satprem is still a light in my life and is very important and has been very important because it was through reading Satprem's book that I went to Auroville. And I can say that for me is a very active force. And I can think about the importance of Satprem in the spreading and the diffusion of the work of Mother Sri Aurobindo, especially due to the translations he has done of the Sri Aurobindo's books, the translation he has done about Savitri, and also, of course, the transcription of the Mother's Agenda, which is a fabulous document. And Satprem, for me, is really important for that, and also because still nowadays, you know, is many persons have the call to come to Auroville after reading Satprem. I was in Auroville a few months after my visit to Satprem, and speaking with my friend Ganga Lakshmi about what happened there, she told me, please come, and we are going to call Kirit Joshi. Of course, he was so interested that we have spent a full day, and he asked me to tell him all the details of what I had witnessed being there with Satprem. And after telling him all the details and after sharing many things also, he told me that in 2006, which is the year I went to meet Satprem, he had received a letter from Satprem, telling him that he has reached the end of the journey, the end of the path, that he has reached the goal. Also, after seeing Satprem a few years later, but on the same continuity, I have met a very famous, well-known French medical professor who has set up a technique of diagnose and treatment with application of light colors on the head and on the body with the control of the pulse. And actually, I'm quite happy to practice this method today, but my only sadness is that if I had this method in my hands at the time I met Satprem, I'm sure I could have been able to help him much better than I did. With this method of photonic medicine, it's quite interesting because when we apply colored beam on the body with the control of the pulse, which allows us to know which color the body is needing, how long the duration, in which place, etc. You know, it's like we bring to the body an input of outside energy. Because when the body is sick, it's because there is a disturbance, there is a lack of energy somewhere, and somehow all this disturbance is, the death is slowly entering in the body and getting settled in the body. And what is quite interesting is then when you apply a beam of light and of colored light with all the control I spoke before, you bring a new energy to the body, and this new energy allows the body to recover and to function again, and some functions which were not functioning anymore are being alive anew. And You know, when I work with this method of photonic medicine, because we have really amazing results on so-called incurable diseases or irreversible diseases, and when I work with this photonic medicine, I think very often of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, because I really have the impression of going and fighting the death in the body where it is settled, and removing this death from the body, and then life can come again.
Et ça, c'est vraiment merveilleux.
Oh, my child, this is thy mother's prayer. This is thy